I hope you brought a Bible with you this morning. You might want to find Luke 18, and we'll continue our study of that great chapter, and I'll read from it in just a moment. Two quick things I wanted to mention, and one of them is this new members class that is right after this service today. If you didn't call us and sign up, may the fleas of 1,000 camels nest in your armpits. But being the forgiving person that I am, we'd still love to have you. And as you know, I've said before, there's plenty of lunches back there. You can have mine. Look at me. I mean, I could pass up a meal or two. So come on back. And you're obligated to nothing, but it is the first and the most significant step in the whole process of new members. Secondly, that young woman that you saw me interview, she's a star. She has put together what I think is got to be one of the finest children's ministries to be found anywhere. If I had a small family and I had small children, I would run, not walk, to get my children in the ministry that she oversees. But before you get back there with your children, we've got to staff it. We've got to make sure that the excellence that we've come to appreciate is maintained. So, folks, give that some thought. Tis the season, and we hope that you will join us back there as we do some very significant ministry on the part of our children, your children. Now, let me read to you from Luke chapter 18. This is a parable that many of you know before my reading it, but here it comes. He also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and treated others with contempt. 2 men went up into the temple to pray, one a Pharisee and the other a tax collector. The Pharisee, standing by himself, prayed thus: God, I thank you that I am not like other men, extortioners, unjust, adulterers, or even like this tax collector. I fast twice a week. I give tithes of all that I get. But the tax collector, standing far off, would not even lift up his eyes to heaven, but beat his breast, saying, God, be merciful to me, a sinner. I tell you, this man went down to his house justified rather than the other. For everyone who exalts himself will be humbled, but the one who humbles himself will be exalted. The grass withers and the flower fades, but the word of our God, this word, this endures forever. Guys, without a doubt, the 3 most widely read and well-loved parables of all of Jesus' parables are, number 1, the prodigal son, number 2, the great Samaritan, or the good Samaritan, and number 3, this one. Probably in that order. One of the interesting things I found as I prepared was that all 3 of these most beloved and most widely read parables are found in a book that was written by a Gentile, Luke. And they are found no place else in the New Testament except in the writings of a Gentile. Now, that may be some useless, needless piece of information, and yet it caused me to wonder whether or not people who had seen themselves as far off, in a faraway country, a Gentile, might have more of a tender heart towards the things of Jesus than those others who never really saw the magnitude of their problem. The more you see of the issue that separates you from God, the more you see of that, the more the heart longs after this God to know him and to know him better and better. Now, that's just something to ponder as we make our way through this parable. So what is this parable about? Well, I can tell you one thing that it's not about. It's not about prayer. You know, one of the commentaries that I read went to great lengths to tell you that these two men went to the temple to pray, and it was about prayer. Folks, that is flabbergasting. I don't know how you can say that. I don't know how you miss it. It's right there for you in verse 9. Look at verse 9. He also told this parable to some who trusted in themselves that they were righteous and treated all others with contempt. That's what this is about. It's a very brief parable, but it's addressing that issue. Yeah, they did pray, but the parable is about verse 9. And so what I want to do this morning with the parable, we're going to spend 3 or 4 weeks on it. What I want to do this morning is give you kind of the great panoramic view of the parable, the 50,000 foot perspective on this wonderful parable. And to do that, I want to start this morning by addressing what I've called the extraordinary two-ness of the New Testament. That may be a word that I made up. I don't know whether there is a word, two-ness, but it's T-W-O-ness, two-ness, not three-ness, not four-ness, but two-ness. The extraordinary two-ness of the New Testament. Let me explain to you what I mean. Let's start with that parable, the prodigal son. You know, the prodigal, it's in chapter 15 of Luke. It opens like this. There was a man who had 2 sons. It wasn't a man who had 3 sons. It wasn't a man who had 2 sons and a daughter. It was a man who had 2 sons. One of them was a prodigal that ultimately found his way back to his father, and the other one really represented the self-righteousness of the Pharisees. Oh, isn't that interesting? Somewhat like this parable in Luke 18, yeah. But the point is, folks, there are only 2. There are only 2 religious positions. Either the position of the prodigal who found his way back to the father, or this other thing that where someone sees all the righteousness that they need is found in themselves. Two-ness, not three-ness. Or how about this? You remember in the parable or in the Sermon on the Mount where Jesus talks about there being a broad way and a narrow way. There's no other third way in between those two that's called the happy trail. No, there's a broad way and there's a narrow way, and there are no other options other than those 2. There's only 2 of them, not 3. Or how about that parable of the 10 virgins? You know, there were 5 wise ones, and then there were 5 foolish ones. But there wasn't 3 wise, 3 foolish, and 4 in the middle. No, they're wise or foolish virgins. One of the 2. That's all there was. Just wise ones and foolish ones. And then who could forget that story that is told about the field? And Jesus explains that the field represents the world. And in that field, there is growing some wheat and some tares. But it's not wheat and some tares and some corn. No. Out in that field, there are only 2 things that are happening. That field is occupied by wheat, or it's occupied by tares. Just wheat and tares. Not wheat and tares and something else. Or that story about Lazarus and the rich man. Oh my, they both die, as you may recall, and Lazarus goes to heaven. The rich man doesn't. But there's no third option for you. Like one goes here, one goes there, and then there's this other thing that people go to. No, one goes there, and the 2 options are all that exists. And then, who could forget that story that Jesus tells about building your spiritual house? You know, Matthew chapter 7. Everybody wants a spiritual house, and you either build it on a rock or you build it on sand. There's not a third type of soil. I don't like that. That's a little bit, so I'm going to build mine here. No, there's only this extraordinary two-ness of a rock and of sand. You either build your house on a rock or you build it on sand. Oh, and then in Matthew chapter 19, Jesus talks about God creating them male and female. Not three, just two. In fact, when Noah built his ark and he let the animals on, he got a male and a female of every kind of animal. But that's all, because there was only two of those. And then, my goodness, we certainly wouldn't want to forget that story in Matthew chapter 25 that's so scary. And it begins like this. The story begins, when the Son of Man comes again, what's he going to do? Well, he's going to separate the sheep from the goats. There's not sheep and goats and horses. There's not sheep and goat and cattle. No, when he returns, there will be two brands, two categories of religious folk. One are called sheep and the other is called goats. Now folks, that brings us to the parable under examination in Luke 18. What do you have? Well, you have a Pharisee who, as you can tell, was very impressed with himself. And then you've got the tax collector, the publican. Just two. That's all you get. It's just a Pharisee and a publican, not a semi-Pharisee, no kind of hybrid, not a semi-Pharisee and a semi-publican. No, just a Pharisee and a tax collector. So, ladies and gentlemen, what is it that the New Testament is trying to teach us? Well, it's trying to teach us the same thing that the Old Testament is trying to teach us. Not to mention that ark that only had males and female animals on it. Do you remember that story when Israel was trekking through the wilderness? And Moses was about at the end of his ministry, and God told him to do this very strange thing. I want you to divide Israel up into two groups. I want you to put one group on this mount called Ebal, and I want you to put the other group on this mount called Gerizim. That one on the Gerizim will represent the cursed, and the one on Ebal will represent the blessed. There will either be the blessed or the cursed. Only two, not three mountains or a third high hill. No, just two mountains. One represents blessing, one represents curse, and that's it. Because, ladies and gentlemen, there is an extraordinary two-ness about the scriptures. And by the way, if you want to see it just really played out again and again and again, then all you need to do is look at wisdom literature. You know, Psalms, Proverbs. In fact, the first Psalm, Psalm 1, is considered by most scholars to be the introduction to the whole book. That is, the theme that you find in Psalm 1 is the theme that's going to be played out throughout the other 149 Psalms. What is that theme? Well, let me read it to you. Therefore, the wicked will not stand in the judgment, nor sinners in the congregation of the righteous. For the Lord knows the way of the righteous, but the way of the wicked will perish. What's going on there? Well, you're getting a contrast, a comparison between the wicked and the righteous. But you're not getting a comparison between the wicked and the righteous and the semi-righteous. No, there's no third option. What you see here are the two religious options that exist: the wicked and the righteous. Oh, and then you come to the book of Proverbs, folks. The book of Proverbs must mention it 100 times. Can I read you just a couple of them? This is in Proverbs chapter 11, verse 10. When it goes well with the righteous, the city rejoices. And when the wicked perish, there are shouts of gladness. So what's in contrast there? Well, the wicked and the righteous. And then you look at verse 23, the desire of the righteous ends only in good, the expectation of the wicked is wrath. Again and again, 100 times in the book of Proverbs. The wicked are like this, the righteous are like this. The wicked are like this, the righteous are like this. Because there is an extraordinary two-ness to the scriptures. Let me read you just one more, actually a couple more, out of the book of Proverbs. This is Proverbs chapter 15, verse 28. The heart of the righteous ponders how to answer, but the mouth of the wicked pours out evil things. The Lord is far from the wicked, but he hears the prayer of the righteous. All I'm trying to show you, ladies and gentlemen, is that in the book of Proverbs, there is a contrast, there is a comparison that is going on. Yes, between what? 3 options? 4 options? No, ladies and gentlemen, only 2. 2 options. The extraordinary two-ness of the scriptures, which brings us back to our parable, where you find what? 2 options. You see, there are people who look to themselves that they are righteous, and there are people who look elsewhere for their righteousness. And that, ladies and gentlemen, those are the only 2 options that exist. Either I think I'm righteous enough in and of myself, or I have to look away from myself for my righteousness. Gang, over and over and over again, the New Testament makes this point. And the point is this, that when it comes to religion, there is a binary decision that you must make. Oh, how the world hates that word, binary. There are 2 options, and you must choose from one of those 2 options. And then over and over and over again, the culture tells you that the New Testament is wrong. And it then, in its place of the New Testament, it offers up that notion, a notion of its own devising, the culture that is, and that there are numerous options, and not only that, not only are there numerous options, all of them are equally acceptable. That is called, ladies and gentlemen, if you did not know, I think you do, that's called pluralism. That when it comes to religion, you have multiple options, all of which are equally sound, and you can choose the one that suits your fancy. That, ladies and gentlemen, is brought to you courtesy of another ism called relativism. You've heard of that. Relativism is the notion that there's no such thing as truth. There's no such thing as absolutes, because all truth is relative. And once you buy into that, then the next step is pluralism. There's no truth, therefore all these truths are equally as, they're equal options in all of them. So, if the culture is committed to relativism, and it is, you can expect pluralism to follow closely behind. Pluralism which states all these religious options are yours, and they're equally as profitable. Now, guys, you may be convinced relativist this morning. And so when somebody says to you there are numerous paths up the same mountain, when it comes to religion, there are numerous paths up this mountain, and they all arrive at the same place with God, then you're all in. If relativism is the way you view truth, then such a notion about the mountain and going all the, you drank the Kool-Aid. It's all, that's you. Now, you're free to own that position, but what I can tell you is this, that position, that notion of there being multiple options for you and they're all equally good, that notion, that claim of the mountain is on a course of conflict with this book. Folks, this book teaches an extraordinary two-ness. Not a three-ness, not a four-ness, but a two-ness. And gang, you are free to believe the culture, or you can believe this book. But you can't have both of them because they contradict each other, ladies and gentlemen. And there is in philosophical thought what's called the law of non-contradiction. You know what that says? It says basically if something is true, then the opposite is false. The two things that contradict each other can't be true at the same sense and the same time. So you can have the culture which clamors about pluralism, or you can have this, and its extraordinary two-ness. So you see, my job this morning is not so much to convince you. I'm not man enough to convince you. My job this morning is just to show you, in all of these instances, an extraordinary two-ness. Now, guys, people who listen to sermons are always saying to me, I want there to be application. Application when a man's preaching. I think there should be some application. Okay, let me give you two pieces of application. Number one, because of this extraordinary two-ness, that is why the culture considers Christians so narrow. And they despise us for our narrowness. They call us bigots. They hate us because we promote such a thing as two-ness. I've often wondered, why hate? I've got a position, you've got a position, but no. My position is something that is so despised by them. Why? I think it says something about the claims of two-ness. I think it says something that these claims of two-ness are very threatening. You don't need to despise me because I differ from you, but you do. Why? Is this two-ness a threat to your position? I think it is. That's the first application. Here's the second one. You want application? Here it is. At this moment, at this very moment, at this very time in this very room, everyone here is either a prodigal or an elder brother. You are either on the broad road or you are on the narrow road. At this very moment, at this very time, you are either a wise virgin or a foolish one. At this very moment, you are either wheat or you are tares. At this very second, you are either blessed or cursed. At this very moment, ladies and gentlemen, you are either a sheep or you are a goat. Right now, right this second, you are either one category or the other one. Because there are only two. And I see that in the extraordinary two-ness of Old and New Testaments. You are either a Pharisee or you are a publican. One or the other. Now, should you discover that you are on the wrong road and you're on the narrow road, you're on the wide road, not the narrow one, or that you're not wheat, but you're tare, and you're not a sheep, you're a goat, should you discover that, what should you do? The parable tells you. If you are here as one who looks to yourself for the production of your own righteousness, then you must stop that and look elsewhere for your righteousness. Folks, the good news of the gospel is the very righteousness that God demands, the righteousness that is so necessary for us to have, is a righteousness that God himself provided. Ladies and gentlemen, there is not a righteous speck in me, but I am clothed in a robe that I got from Jesus. It's his righteousness. The righteousness that is acceptable in heaven is not mine, it's Christ's, and I get his by faith. So, my dear friend, if you discover today or tomorrow or the next day that you're not a sheep, but you're a goat, then here's what you must do. Cry out to God. God, be merciful to me, the sinner. You know where I got that? From this parable.